Welcome back to Echoes of Ihsan, everyone. We're diving into Islamic traditions again today.
Always exciting.
This time, it's about fasting.
Fasting. It's so central to Islam.
We'll be looking at Sunan al Tirmidhi, Volume 2.
Great source for this deep dive.
We want to go beyond just Ramadan, though. All the different types of fasting.
There's a lot more to uncover than just Ramadan, that's for sure.
So it's like fasting 101.
But way more interesting, like a deep dive should be.
Okay, let's get started. Fasting in Ramadan is one of Islam's 5 pillars.
Absolutely fundamental.
But what makes fasting so important in Islam, would you say?
Well, it really changes you on a personal level. It teaches self-discipline.
Right.
And empathy, too. When you don't eat or drink.
You understand what it's like to be hungry.
Exactly. And you feel for those who are hungry every day.
You appreciate what you have more, too.
Gratitude, yes. But it's deeper than that, too.
How so?
It's about your soul. When you're not focused on physical needs.
There's space for something else.
Yes. You can look inward. You connect more with God.
It's like a reset button on what we want all the time.
I like that. You break free from just your desires.
And find strengths from somewhere else.
Spiritual strength.
Okay, now let's get into all these different types of fasting besides Ramadan.
Sounds good.
Sunan al Tirmidhi mentions a bunch.
Yeah.
There's fasting on the day of Ashura.
Ashura, the 10th of Muharram.
First month of the Islamic calendar.
It has such a deep meaning.
I know there are different stories about what happened on Ashura.
There are. But what's key is that it marks a very important event. When Prophet Moses and the Israelites were saved.
From Bethina.
Pharaoh and his army.
So a day of liberation.
Yes. By fasting, we remember God's protection.
His mercy.
And power, too.
But I've heard that people debate about the exact date of Ashura.
It's true.
How can the Islamic calendar be uncertain about a date?
It uses the moon, the lunar cycles.
Oh, right.
Those don't perfectly match up with our regular calendar, the solar one.
So sometimes the calculations
can vary,
leading to different opinions.
It shows how dynamic Islamic scholarship is. Always learning, you see.
So fasting on Ashura is encouraged.
Yes.
But not required.
The hadith says it's a choice.
That flexibility is nice. Islam recognizes individual circumstances, right?
Absolutely. It's a path, not just rigid rules.
So people fast or not, depending on their situation.
Exactly. That makes it possible for everyone to participate.
Let's talk about another time period, the 10 days of Dhul Hijjah.
The last month of the Islamic calendar.
It ends with Hajj. Right.
Pilgrimage, one of the pillars.
And those 10 days are considered very blessed.
And people do more acts of worship then.
Including fasting.
Yes.
Especially on the day of Arafat.
That's when all the pilgrims gather.
On the plain of Arafat, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you're not doing Hajj, fasting that day
connects you to that energy.
Exactly. It's like a global wave of spirituality.
So fasting links us to those events, even if we're not physically there.
You got it. Fascinating. Sunan al Tirmidhi also mentions 6 days of fasting in Shawwal.
The month right after Ramadan.
Like an extension of Ramadan.
Yes, in a way. You keep the good feelings going.
The spiritual momentum.
It's like a bonus round after training hard.
Does it come with special rewards too? Or just that good feeling?
The hadith doesn't specify rewards, actually.
That's interesting.
It's more about the blessings, staying devoted.
So you keep what you learned in Ramadan alive in your daily life.
That's a great way to look at it.
Now, if you want to fast regularly, but not for a whole month.
Sunan al Tirmidhi talks about that too.
3 days every month.
It's very manageable, like a mini recharge.
Any specific days that are best?
It doesn't say in the hadith, but many people fast on the white days.
White days.
The 13th, 14th, and 15th of each lunar month.
Why white?
The moon's full then, at its brightest.
The moon has spiritual meaning in Islam.
Yes, its cycles are important. These days with the full moon, it's like...
You sync your practice with nature.
Exactly.
It's amazing. So we have Ashura, the 10 days, Shawwal, 3 days a month.
And Sunan al Tirmidhi also talks about fasting every day.
That sounds intense.
It is. It's called Adar. But there are restrictions.
Like what?
It shouldn't be nonstop, every single day with no breaks.
Why not?
Islam is about balance. We have to take care of our bodies too.
It's a trust from God, right?
Exactly. So even with something as good as fasting, there are limits.
What would you tell someone who wants to fast every day?
Study the hadith carefully, talk to scholars.
Get expert advice.
And most importantly, listen to your body.
That makes sense. Now, what about fasting while traveling? That's relevant for many today.
Very relevant.
And Sunan al Tirmidhi talks about that.
It shows how compassionate Islamic law is.
How so?
It understands that traveling can be tough.
So even during Ramadan?
You can break the fast if you need to. Your well-being matters.
That's good to know. But I've heard some say it is obligatory to fast while traveling. Others say it's not.
It's true. There are different opinions.
Why is that?
Well, Islamic scholars, throughout history, they've analyzed the texts.
Tried to understand them in different situations.
And that leads to different interpretations, even on something like this.
So what should someone do if they're not sure?
Talk to scholars they trust, ones who know Islamic law well.
And ultimately,
Make your own informed choice, based on good guidance.
that shows how Islam balances things,
Right.
right? God's guidance, but also our own choices.
You're right. It's very nuanced.
Okay, let's talk about breaking the fast now.
A very important part.
What does Sunan al Tirmidhi say about what we should eat?
The Prophet recommended dates and water.
Simple, but effective, I guess,
Dates give you energy quickly,
after not eating all day.
and water, of course, hydrates you.
So it nourishes both body and soul.
Exactly. Islam is holistic like that. It cares about the whole person.
Now, there are some things to keep in mind when fasting with others.
Etiquette is important.
Sunan al Tirmidhi mentions this, right?
Yes, if you're staying with people who aren't fasting,
You have to be respectful,
especially if you're fasting voluntarily, not because it's Ramadan.
so they don't feel pressured.
Exactly. We should always be mindful of others, even when we're focused on our worship.
Now, here's a curious one. Cupping while fasting.
Cupping.
Yeah, it's an old healing practice.
Where they put heated cups on your skin.
Right. Creates suction.
I've heard of that.
So what's the debate?
Whether it breaks your fast or not, some scholars say it does, some say it doesn't.
It's complicated.
It shows how complex Islamic jurisprudence can be. Different ways of interpreting things.
We should really try to understand the different viewpoints, not just blindly follow one, huh?
Definitely.
Before we move on to part 2, let's talk about women in fasting.
Sunan al Tirmidhi has some specific points about that.
Like, a married woman needs her husband's permission to fast.
If it's a voluntary fast, yes.
Why is that?
Marriage in Islam is a partnership. Decisions are made together.
Even about spiritual things.
It shows respect.
And there's also that rule about women shaving their heads.
The Prophet forbade that.
What's the reason behind that?
The hadith doesn't say specifically, but it's generally understood.
As about keeping differences between men and women.
And following Islam's ideas about modesty.
But Islam is expressed differently in different cultures, right?
That's a great point. It's an ongoing conversation in the Muslim community, how to apply these teachings today.
So much to think about. We've barely scratched the surface here.
Fasting really is a vast and rich topic.
It connects to history, spirituality, our everyday lives. Thank you for all this insight.
You're welcome. It's always a pleasure to talk about these things,
And to everyone listening, thank you for joining us. Stay tuned for part 2.
where we'll explore even more about fasting. It's amazing how each type of fasting fits together, like weaving a tapestry of Islamic practice.
Yeah, like a spiritual toolkit. Different tools for different times.
Exactly. And speaking of tools, Sunan al Tirmidhi also gets into some funny little details, like that guy who broke his fast too early.
Oh yeah, I remember that one. He was so eager he got ahead of himself.
He was traveling with the Prophet during Ramadan.
And he thought the sun had already set.
That's right. But he was wrong. So he ate. The Prophet told him to keep fasting anyway.
Because his intention was off.
The fast was only broken because of a mistake, not on purpose.
So Islam is understanding about those kinds of things.
It emphasizes compassion and sincerity. It's not just about following the rules blindly.
It's about the heart, right?
Exactly. Now, a lot of people new to fasting find the hunger tough.
The cravings.
Sunan al Tirmidhi doesn't give specific tips for that, but
It says to focus on the spiritual side.
yes, it's not about punishing yourself. It's about purifying your heart.
So those hunger pangs,
They're part of the journey. You don't ignore them, but you see them differently.
like they're a reminder of your commitment to something bigger.
Beautifully put.
What about medicine? Does that break the fast?
Sunan al Tirmidhi doesn't talk about medicine specifically, but it does say what does break the fast.
Like,
Throwing up on purpose, swallowing things that aren't food or drink.
so the difference is if you do it intentionally.
Right. If medicine is for your health.
It's probably okay.
But it's always best to ask a scholar or doctor if you're unsure.
Good advice. You know, there's that story in Sunan al Tirmidhi that shows how committed the Prophet was to purity.
What story is that?
About him doing ghusl, after being intimate with his wives.
Oh, yes. It shows how faith was part of his every moment.
Even in private moments.
The hadith says he embraced or kissed his wives. Then he did ghusl.
The full ritual bath
Yeah.
before praying.
It's a powerful reminder. Faith isn't something we turn on and off. It's always there.
Guiding us no matter what we're doing.
Striving for that purity in body and soul.
Speaking of spiritual things, Sunan al Tirmidhi also talks about etiquette.
Ah, yes, itikaf, a spiritual retreat.
To stay in the mosque, right?
Yes, you focus completely on worship and reflection.
Sounds intense.
It's about getting away from worldly distractions, being in God's presence.
So you can really connect with him. Is it specifically for when you're fasting?
It's often done in the last 10 days of Ramadan, but it can be done at other times too.
It makes the benefits of fasting stronger.
They work together. When you detach from worldly desires through fasting,
It's easier to focus on the spiritual during itikaf.
exactly. You pray, you read the Quran, you think deeply. It's a deep dive into faith.
Sunan al Tirmidhi says it's a time for seeking knowledge too.
Yes, it's not just about being alone. It's about learning and understanding Islam more deeply.
And it's connected to Laylatul Qadr too, right?
The night of power, when the Quran was first revealed,
A very special night.
more valuable than 1,000 months of worship, angels come down to earth.
Wow. And people try to find out exactly when Laylatul Qadr is.
It's thought to be in the last 10 days of Ramadan.
So by doing itikaf then?
You increase your chances of experiencing it. It's a time for powerful prayer, asking for forgiveness, and really connecting with the Quran.
That's incredible. Sunan al Tirmidhi also talks about what happens if you break the fast accidentally, which can happen, right?
It does. Don't worry. It doesn't invalidate the fast.
As long as it's not on purpose,
If you forget you're fasting and eat something, for example,
it's okay.
Islam understands we're human, we make mistakes.
It's about being sincere, right? Doing your best.
And if you have to break the fast because you're sick or something,
That's okay too.
there's flexibility.
Life happens.
Islam takes that into account. Now, about fasting every day, like we talked about before,
Abor?
there's more to say about that. The hadith says it's different if you fast continuously without breaks.
That's not recommended.
Not as much as fasting every other day.
So balance again.
Taking care of your body and your spirit.
Why is fasting every other day so good?
It doesn't say specifically in the hadith,
Oh, okay.
but it's understood to make you more pious, more devoted. You're constantly reminding yourself of God.
It's a rhythm woven into your life.
But it's not easy. It takes commitment. Talk to scholars if you're thinking about it.
Don't jump in without being prepared. I love how hadith isn't just about spiritual stuff, but also everyday life.
Sunan al Tirmidhi has so much advice about how to live as a Muslim.
Even things people might be embarrassed to ask about. Like, what about breaking wind when you're fasting?
A natural bodily function.
Does it break the fast?
The hadith says no. If it's unintentional, don't worry about it.
So it's not about being anxious over every little thing.
It's about being sincere and focusing on your connection with God.
Back to traveling during Ramadan. Sunan al Tirmidhi has tips for those who choose to fast while traveling.
It says to be moderate, listen to your body.
And if it's too hard,
You can break the fast. You have permission.
you always have that choice.
Within the guidance of Islam. That balance is so important to me.
Me too. Now, what about being sick? Can you fast then?
Sunan al Tirmidhi is very clear about that.
It says,
If you're sick, you don't have to fast. In Ramadan or at any other time.
health comes first.
Caring for your body is part of Islam. Don't harm yourself by fasting when you're ill.
That makes sense. It's all connected, isn't it? Mind, body, spirit.
Exactly. Okay, let's talk about something delicate but important. Intimate relations during Ramadan.
Couples often have questions about that.
Sunan al Tirmidhi says it's only allowed after breaking the fast.
So, from sunset to dawn,
Yes. During the fasting hours, you abstain from that too.
what if it happens accidentally?
You ask God for forgiveness and make up for breaking the fast.
It's about recognizing your mistake and doing better next time.
Islam is about accountability, but also mercy. God understands our weaknesses.
That's reassuring. Sunan al Tirmidhi also mentions fasting for a specific reason. Intentional fasting,
You can fast to ask God for forgiveness or to express gratitude.
or if you're making a big decision.
Fasting can help you focus on what you need from God. It's like focusing a spiritual lens.
The prophet himself fasted when things were difficult.
To seek guidance, find strength.
So it's not just about the food, it's about your connection with God.
It's about becoming closer to Him and transforming yourself.
Wow, we've covered so much.
Sunan al Tirmidhi is full of wisdom. It shows how fasting is much more than just not eating or drinking.
It's about purifying yourself,
Yeah.
connecting with God, growing as a person.
Fasting takes you to your core. It's a powerful journey.
Well said. We've just touched the surface here, everyone. Keep learning.
There's so much more to discover about this amazing practice. Join us for part 3.
Welcome back to Echoes of Ihsan. We're continuing our deep dive into fasting in Islam, using Sunan al Tirmidhi as our guide. It's incredible how many different facets this practice has.
It's more than just a physical act. It impacts you emotionally and spiritually, too.
One thing that stood out to me is how fasting can be a way to make up for mistakes. Expiation, it's called.
It shows how merciful Islam is. It's not about punishing yourself.
But making things right,
Yes, you acknowledge what you did wrong,
you take responsibility.
and you show God you're sincere.
Through fasting, it's like hitting the reset button.
You purify yourself and get back on the right path.
What are some examples of when fasting is used this way?
Sunan al Tirmidhi mentions breaking an oath, for example, or doing something you're not supposed to during Hajj.
Ah, the pilgrimage.
Those are serious things. So fasting shows how sorry you are,
It's a way to ask God for forgiveness.
and to show your commitment to doing better.
It's amazing how powerful something as simple as not eating can be.
It's because our physical and spiritual selves are connected. What we do with our bodies affects our souls.
Fasting brings those two together.
It purifies both. Now, Sunan al Tirmidhi also talks about the link between fasting and the Quran.
Two of the most important things in Islam.
They strengthen each other.
How so?
When you're fasting, it's easier to focus on the Quran. You understand it better.
And reading the Quran can inspire you when you're fasting.
They work together beautifully.
What does Sunan al Tirmidhi say about this connection specifically?
It says to read more Quran during Ramadan. Think about its meaning. There are even certain chapters that are especially relevant to fasting.
Right.
Surah al-Baqarah. It lays out the rules of fasting, puts it in context.
So you're weaving together different parts of your faith.
Exactly, creating a whole spiritual experience.
I love how practical Islamic teachings are. They apply to everyday life. And that's true with fasting, too.
Especially when you think about social situations.
Yeah. How do you act around people who aren't fasting? Especially nowadays, when everyone's from different backgrounds.
That's a good question. Sunan al Tirmidhi reminds us to be respectful, even if you're the only one fasting.
So what does that look like?
Don't show off your food or drinks.
Right.
Don't complain about being hungry or thirsty.
Basically, don't make others uncomfortable.
Exactly. Be considerate.
Fasting isn't just about you and God, it's about community, too.
Showing understanding, even if people do things differently.
Sunan al Tirmidhi also talks about the harder parts of fasting.
Like what?
How it can make your emotions stronger. Anger, for example.
That's true. You have to learn to control those feelings.
It's part of purifying yourself.
The hadith stresses patience, forbearance.
Not letting your anger control you. Especially when you're fasting.
Fasting is about making yourself better, inside and out.
So you use this time to grow.
And to learn how to react well, even when it's hard.
Show true strength of character. One of the most important things about fasting, according to Sunan al Tirmidhi,
Is your intention, why you're doing it.
it can't just be for show.
If you're fasting just to impress others,
Or because everyone else
that
is.
doesn't mean anything.
It has to come from the heart.
You're doing it for God, not for people.
He sees what's truly in your heart.
That's what matters most, being sincere.
It's not just about fasting. It's about how we live our whole lives.
Always trying to please God in everything we do.
This deep dive into Sunan al Tirmidhi has been incredible. Fasting is so much deeper than I ever realized.
It's a journey that changes you from the inside out.
It's about connecting with God, becoming a better person, and understanding yourself more deeply.
It's an amazing practice, full of wisdom and beauty.
Thank you for joining us on this exploration, everyone. We hope you've been inspired to learn more about fasting.
And to experience its transformative power in your own lives.